Did my husband really expect me to forgive him after what he did at my father's funeral? I found out my boyfriend publicly announced our breakup at my father's funeral reception while I was outside crying by the casket, and now his entire family is calling me vindictive for what I did next. While I stood at my father's graveside trying to hold myself together, my partner of 6 years was inside the reception hall telling everyone who would listen that he was finally free from his uptight, controlling partner who never let him have any fun. And honestly, I didn't find out until 3 days later when my cousin sent me the video someone had recorded. Let me back up because this story doesn't start at the funeral. It starts about 8 months earlier when I should have seen the warning signs written in neon letters across the sky. I met my partner at a charity auction where my marketing firm was sponsoring an event for local animal shelters. He was volunteering at the dog adoption booth, and he had this whole passionate speech about giving forgotten creatures a second chance at happiness. My animal-loving heart melted on the spot. Looking back, I realized the only creature that needed a second chance was him, and I gave him about 75 too many. We moved in together after dating for 8 months, which everyone said was too fast, but I was convinced we had something special. His name went on the lease alongside mine because I believed in equal partnership. That belief cost me dearly, but we'll get to that. The first year was actually good, or at least I thought it was. He had a steady job at a marketing startup, we split bills fairly evenly, and we talked about future plans like normal couples do. But somewhere around month 15, things started shifting in ways I couldn't quite identify at first. His contributions to rent became irregular. He'd promised to pay his half, then suddenly an unexpected expense would come up. His car needed repairs, his mother needed help with medical bills, his company delayed paychecks. Every month brought a new crisis that somehow always resulted in me covering more than my share. I started picking up freelance projects on weekends to compensate. When I'd mention feeling stressed about money, he'd get defensive and say I was being materialistic, or that I didn't understand how hard he was trying. So I stopped mentioning it and just worked more. Then my father got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then a diagnosis that turned our world inside out. Stage 4 lung cancer, aggressive, limited treatment options. My father was my hero, the man who raised me alone after my mother passed when I was 12. Watching him deteriorate was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. I took family leave from work to help care for him during his final months. My partner seemed supportive at first. He'd ask about my dad's condition and occasionally come to the hospital for brief visits. But as the weeks wore on, he became increasingly distant and irritable. He complained that I was never home, that all my attention went to my father, that our relationship was suffering. I was watching my father die, and somehow I was the problem for not being emotionally available enough. During this time, I wasn't working my regular job or taking freelance projects, which meant money was extremely tight. My father's insurance covered most medical costs, but there were still expenses, co-pays, medications, transportation. I had savings, but they were depleting rapidly. My partner's solution was to start going out more with friends to de-stress, which would have been fine except his idea of de-stress meant expensive dinners, concert tickets, and bar tabs that he charged to our joint credit card that I had stupidly agreed to open with him. When I'd see the charges and ask about them, he'd say he needed an outlet for the stress of what we were going through. As if he was the one watching his father fade away. My father passed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and my partner wasn't there. He said hospitals made him too emotional, and he'd already said his goodbyes the day before during a 5-minute visit. Planning the funeral while grieving was brutal. My aunt helped tremendously, but I still had to make 1,000 decisions while feeling like my heart had been ripped out. My partner helped with exactly 2 things. He picked up the programs from the printer, and he chose his outfit for the service. The funeral was beautiful in that devastating way that funerals for beloved people are. My father had touched so many lives, and the chapel was packed with people sharing stories about his kindness and humor. I gave a eulogy that I barely remember because I was crying through most of it. After the service, we had a reception at a local restaurant that my father had loved. I was emotionally exhausted, but trying to be present for everyone who had come to pay respects. I stood outside for a while, just needing air and space to process everything. That's when he apparently decided to hold court inside. According to multiple people who later reached out, my partner spent 30 minutes at the reception talking about how difficult the past few months had been for him, how I had become completely consumed with my father's illness and had neglected our relationship, how he felt like he'd lost his partner to grief and obligation, how he was looking forward to getting back to normal and finally having his life back. At my father's funeral reception, while I was outside crying, my cousin recorded part of it on her phone, not to be malicious, but because she was so shocked by what she was hearing that she thought I needed to know. She sent it to me 3 days after the funeral with an apology and a warning that it was upsetting. She wasn't kidding. Watching that video felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. There he was, holding court with a drink in his hand that I had paid for, at a reception I had organized for my father who had just died, complaining about how hard my grief had been on him. The comments from people at the reception ranged from uncomfortable agreement to visible shock. A few people tried to change the subject, but he kept returning to his main theme, which was that he'd been incredibly patient and supportive, but was ready for things to return to normal. I watched that video 4 times, and each time I felt something inside me crystallize from hurt into cold cold, clear rage. I started going through our financial records, really going through them, not just glancing at statements, but documenting everything. Spreadsheets became my grief therapy. Over the past 6 years together, I had contributed approximately $83,000 more than him to our shared expenses. This included rent, utilities, groceries, and charges on our joint credit card that I had been paying off. $83,000 while he talked about equal partnership and being a team. The joint credit card that he'd been using for his stress relief activities had a balance of $14,000. I had statements showing that 90% of those charges were his. Everything from gaming equipment to dinners out with friends to a weekend trip he took with his buddies while I was caring for my dying father. I also discovered something interesting while going through old emails. That marketing startup he worked for had actually let him go 8 months ago. 8 months. He'd been collecting unemployment and doing occasional gig work while telling me he was still employed and just having temporary pay issues. Every crisis that required me to cover his share of expenses had been a lie. His car didn't need repairs, he needed beer money. His mother didn't have medical bills, he wanted a new gaming console. His company didn't delay paychecks, he didn't have a company. For 8 months, while I juggled full-time work and freelance projects and then family leave to care for my dying father, he had been lying to me daily about having a job. I felt something break inside me that wasn't grief anymore. I made a plan. A careful, methodical plan that I executed with the precision my father had taught me when he'd helped me learn project management for school presentations. Step 1 was separating our finances completely. I went to the bank and removed myself from the joint credit card after paying off the portion that was legitimately shared expenses. His $14,000 of charges were now his problem alone. I documented everything for the bank, showing which purchases were his based on location data, his own social media posts showing him at restaurants and events, and text messages where he'd mentioned buying things. The bank was surprisingly helpful when I explained the situation. They split the account and transferred his balance to a new card in only his name. Step 2 involved our lease. I contacted our landlord and explained that I needed to discuss our living arrangement due to changed financial circumstances. I brought documentation showing that I had paid 87% of our rent over the past 2 years. The landlord was sympathetic, especially when I mentioned that my partner was unemployed and had been for months. We worked out an agreement where I could break the lease early without penalty given the circumstances, and my partner would be responsible for either finding a new roommate to take over my portion or paying the full rent himself until the lease ended in 4 months. Step 3 was the part I'm least proud of, but also don't regret. Remember how my partner worked in marketing before losing his job? He'd been applying to positions for months with no success. I had been using my professional network to help him, sending his information to contacts and putting in good words. I sent a brief, professional email to the 3 contacts who had pending applications from him. I didn't trash talk or go into detail. I simply said that due to personal circumstances, I could no longer recommend him and wished to withdraw my referral. I thanked them for their consideration and apologized for any inconvenience. 2 of the 3 responded saying they understood and appreciated my honesty. 1 had already moved on to other candidates. Step 4 happened over the course of 1 weekend while my partner was away visiting his parents. I had 2 weeks of rage-fueled energy and my cousin helping me. We packed every single item that belonged to me, which was approximately 70% of our furnished apartment. Furniture I had purchased, kitchenware I had collected, decorations I had chosen, even the nice towels and the coffee maker. If I had bought it, it left. What remained was his gaming setup, his clothes, a futon his brother had given him, and a collection of promotional cups from various fast food restaurants. I left the apartment looking like a sad college student's first place, which honestly felt appropriate. I also left something else, a binder. This binder contained printed spreadsheets of every financial transaction from our 6 years together, organized by year and category. I included bank statements, credit card bills, rent receipts, and Venmo transactions. Everything was highlighted and annotated. I also included printouts of text messages where he'd lied about having money coming in, about job interviews that never happened, about expenses that were fabricated. I included screenshots of his social media posts showing him out spending money during times he claimed to be broke. And I included a printed copy of that video from my father's funeral reception with a note that said, "In case you forgot what you said while I was grieving." On the front of the binder, I placed a simple note. This is what our partnership actually looked like. I'm done carrying both of us. I turned in my key to the landlord, updated my address with the post office, and moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment across town that I could afford comfortably on my salary. My cousin helped me unpack while we ate takeout and watched comedy specials. It was the first time I'd laughed since before my father got sick. My phone started ringing the evening after I moved out. First confused texts asking where everything was, then angry calls about how I couldn't just take everything, then panicked messages about the binder and how could I violate his privacy like that. I responded once. Everything I took belonged to me. Everything in that binder is the truth. I'm blocking your number now. Contact me only through email for lease-related issues. Then I blocked him everywhere. Phone, social media, messaging apps, everything. The emails started within hours. Long, rambling emails that cycled through anger, grief, bargaining, and back to anger. He claimed I had blindsided him, that he had been planning to pay me back, that I was abandoning him during a difficult time, that I was heartless and cruel. The irony of being called heartless by someone who complained about me at my father's funeral was not lost on me. His mother called me from her number, which I hadn't blocked. That conversation was enlightening. She had no idea he'd lost his job. She had been sending him money for months because he told her I had lost my job, and he was supporting both of us. I felt terrible for her. She'd been manipulated just like I had. I offered to send her copies of the documentation I'd compiled, and after a long pause, she said yes. 2 days later, she called back. She was crying. She apologized for raising someone who would treat a partner this way. She said she'd been enabling his behavior his whole life and was going to stop. She thanked me for showing her the truth, even though it hurt. That conversation gave me more closure than anything my ex could have said. The mutual friends split predictably. About half reached out to say they supported me and had seen concerning signs they'd ignored. The other half sent messages ranging from both sides nonsense to outright accusations that I was vindictive and cruel. I lost friends I'd had for years because they couldn't accept that someone they liked had been treating me so poorly. That hurt more than I expected. My ex tried showing up at my new apartment building once, but the security system required residents to buzz visitors in, and I simply didn't answer. He stood outside for an hour before giving up. I watched from my window, and honestly, it just made me sad. Not for him, but for the 6 years I'd wasted. The lease situation resolved itself in the most predictable way possible. He couldn't find a roommate willing to take over my portion because the apartment was unfurnished, and he had no furniture to offer. He couldn't afford the full rent on unemployment benefits. He broke the lease after 6 weeks and moved back in with his parents. The landlord didn't pursue him for the remaining rent, which was generous. I sent the landlord a thank you card for being understanding during a difficult time. My ex's unemployment benefits ran out, and according to mutual friends, he's now working retail and living in his parents' basement. His mother is making him pay rent and contribute to household expenses for the first time in his adult life. I wish I could say I felt triumphant about his circumstances, but mostly I just feel relief that I'm not responsible for him anymore. It's been 4 months since I moved out. I'm still grieving my father. That loss is enormous and ongoing, but I'm grieving in my own space, surrounded by my own things, without someone making my grief about their inconvenience. I started therapy, which has helped tremendously. My therapist pointed out that I had been in a caretaker role since my mother died when I was 12, taking care of my father emotionally and managing household tasks beyond my years. I'd carried that pattern into my romantic relationship, finding purpose in fixing someone else's problems rather than acknowledging my own needs. That realization hurt but also explained so much. I've reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during the relationship. Turns out when you're not exhausted from working 2 jobs to support someone else's lifestyle, you have energy for friendships again. My father would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. He'd also probably be disappointed it took me so long. He used to say that the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. I thought he was talking about discipline strategies for kids, but I think he was preparing me for this. I don't regret what I did. Not the financial separation, not withdrawing my professional recommendations, not taking what was mine, not showing his mother the truth. Some people have called my actions vindictive, but I call them setting boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. I didn't ruin his life. He ruined his own life through years of lies, manipulation, and selfishness. I just stopped preventing him from experiencing the natural consequences of his choices. So, did my partner really expect me to forgive him after what he did at my father's funeral? Based on his emails, yes. He genuinely believed that we'd work through this like we'd worked through everything else, which meant I'd eventually forgive him and things would go back to normal. But I finally learned that normal wasn't working for me. Normal meant I carried all the weight while he coasted. Normal meant my needs didn't matter. Normal meant I set myself on fire to keep him warm. I'm building a new normal now, one where I'm the only person I'm responsible for supporting, one where I choose partners who show up when life gets hard instead of complaining about how hard it is for them, one where I believe people when they show me who they are instead of making excuses for them. My father's funeral was the worst day of my life, but what my partner did there was somehow a gift. It showed me so clearly who he was that I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Sometimes you need something absolutely unforgivable to give yourself permission to stop forgiving. I'm okay now. Not happy yet. Grief doesn't work that way, but okay. And okay is good enough for now. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, you're not vindictive for protecting yourself. You're not cruel for expecting partnership in a partnership. You're not heartless for stopping someone from breaking your heart repeatedly. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away and let someone finally grow up, even if they have to do it in their parents' basement.